Good afternoon. Thank you for coming and joining us for our financial management update. We are going to try to make this topic as engaging as possible, but I recognize that financial management is not necessarily the most exciting topic right after lunch. I'm wondering in the room, how many of you are principal investigators that stuck around for this session?
One right here, too.
All right, got a couple. And the rest of you, I'm assuming, are administrators, is that correct? All right, wonderful. Our agenda today, we're going to be covering some real basic general information about our overall payment process in case you're not familiar with that. Again, some of this stuff may be a little dry, but bear with us. We are going to be covering some important topics that don't occur very frequently, but when they do, may have big impacts on your awards. Some of those impacts are the impacts of canceling appropriations and other monitoring notifications that we send out on a reoccurring basis. And then we'll conclude with some of our monitoring updates that we perform. A quick introduction, I'm Justin Pohl. I'm the branch chief of the Payments and Analytics branch, and I'm here with my colleague, Sehrish Shah. She's one of our financial management specialists in our Payments and Outreach section. Our branch falls within the Division of Financial Management. Some of our longer term grant recipients may know us formally as the Cash Management branch, but we support NSF by we make all the payments out of NSF, whether they are grant recipient payments, contract payments, travel-related payments, etc. But we also conduct a variety of analytics and monitoring. We share the monitoring responsibility with our colleagues in the Division of Institution and Award Support. We primarily focus more on a portfolio view, whereas DS often takes a deeper dive into individual awards or institutions. We are also the business owner and operator of the Award Cash Management Service. This is our external-facing payment system. So anytime you are seeking payment for one of your financial assistance awards, you will be interacting and using ACMS. This is our equivalent to the payment management system or the education department's G5 or the Treasury Department's ASAP system. We've now been using ACMS for more than 10 years. When we implemented ACMS, we started collecting reimbursement requests at the award level. And because we were requesting the information at the award level, we discontinued the collection of the SF 425 Federal Financial Report because we considered it to be collecting duplicative information. However, ACMS does not collect all the data elements that were previously requested through the FFR. So we do have a couple ad hoc annual financial reports that we collect, such as the program income report. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. We also maintain a consolidated, comprehensive, frequently asked questions concerning post-award financial matters. I actually brought a few physical copies. So if you're interested, you can come up afterwards and actually grab something that you can take back and put on your desk. Or I put the link here on the slide, but if you want a link to take away and you don't want a physical copy, I have some business cards with the link where you can get a soft copy. And we update that annually. A lot of the questions we get every day, a good 90% of the questions we get every day are covered by this document, so it's a valuable resource. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sehrish.
Thanks, Justin. Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm going to take a deeper dive into the payments operation side of our portfolio. We have a team of 5 specialists dedicated to business support and payment processing. We are assigned NSF grantees based on our portfolio of states. Your point of contact can be found on our external PAB NSF website linked on the previous slide. Please reach out to us if you have any questions regarding your payments, refunds, or any other post-award financial processes. This process flowchart shows our grant payment process at a high level. Sorry. First time, guys. And your ACMS drawdown and the process daily. Please be mindful. The cutoff time for our daily scheduled payment is 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The ACMS transaction must be in certified status to be scheduled for next day processing. The following business day, we review the ACMS drawdown from the previous night's batch and then prepare a payment schedule for transmission to the Department of Treasury. Disbursements are typically scheduled for the next business day, at which time Treasury will process the disbursements to our grantees. One exception to this two-day business process is when we have a large dollar payment schedule. These schedules are schedules exceeding $50 million in payments. To meet Treasury's cash forecasting requirement, the payment for large dollar schedules are dispersed 2 business days after transmission rather than 1. This scenario is more common in peak periods such as our fourth quarter, year-end closeout payment rush, which is typically in August and September, and in June, which is many of our grantees' fiscal year end. When requesting cash during this time, please be mindful for this extra business day. On the next slide, I will talk more about best practices to minimize delays in receiving funds. Now I remember. Summarized here are a few common reasons that could either cause delays in receiving payment or receiving less funds than expected. Typical payment delays could be due to unnecessary NSF remarks or expired SAM registration. And then in case of receiving less money, could be due to a partially accepted transaction. A common question we receive is, if the end-to-end process is 2 business days, why is it taking 3 or more days for my funds to be requested? One scenario is that some transactions require review and approval by a payment specialist like myself before the transaction can be accepted. This additional review can add time to your process request and may cause delays. You can avoid this additional NSF review by not making any unnecessary entries in the remarks field of your transaction. The remarks field should only be used for communicating directly to an NSF staff. If you wish to leave notes to help your organization identify the purpose of this transaction, please utilize the internal comments field instead. This field will not cause any delays in processing. Another example is when your organization has an expired SAM registration. NSF requires an active SAM registration because we disperse funds to the bank account provided within your organization's SAM record. Before requesting a payment transaction, please ensure that your organization's SAM registration is active and up to date, including the banking data. NSF's financial system will stop payments to any awardee with an expired or invalid SAM registration. Therefore, it is imperative to maintain an active and up-to-date SAM registration. Next, I am going to discuss why your payment received may have been less than what you had requested. In some instances, in ACMS, your payment request may have a partially accepted status, which means 1 or more of your submitted payments fail to post our financial system. For example, if you requested payment against 5 awards for a total of $125,000, and one of those awards in the amount of $5,000 had an issue during the interface with our financial system, this payment you receive will not go through, and it will be a total of $120,000 worth of payments. More information on the failed award payment can be found in the error message contained on the transaction in ACMS or by contacting your assigned payment specialist at our website. Once the issue is resolved, the payment can be requested again in a future date. The original transaction will not be automatically processed again. I would like to provide you an update on how the Treasury Offsite Program, also known as TOPS, affects our grant-related payments. So you may be asking yourself, what is the Treasury Offset Program? This is a program that is used by the Department of Treasury to settle unpaid government debt an organization or an individual may have. If your organization has an unpaid debt with a government agency, this debt can be reported to TOPS, which would result in any future payments to the same organization being withheld to settle the debt. This process, while great in theory, has caused a lot of disruptions for many of our grant recipients. In FY22, NSF requested that its award payment related to financial assistance awards, such as grants and cooperative agreements, be exempted from the TOPS offset. NSF received the approval from the Department of Treasury. NSF and Treasury worked to implement the exemption in August of 22. And now, any future award-related payments will no longer be impacted by TOPS offset. Yay! Next, I'm going to talk a bit about the post-award adjustment process. Here is a case study to benchmark your current knowledge of this scenario. Your organization recently received a late supplier subrecipient invoice for costs incurred during this award project period. However, after logging into ACMS, you find that the award has been financially closed. Which answer best applies to this scenario? A, in order to receive reimbursement for this expense, you must send a request to your Division of Grants and Agreement grant official to reopen and extend the award. Or B, in order to receive reimbursement for this expense, you must submit an adjustment via ACMS, provide a justification for the adjustment, and maintain appropriate supporting documentation in the event this expense is audited or selected for additional advanced monitoring. Any guesses? B? Let's see. You go, yes. Okay. I was like, wait a minute, where is it? So yes, the answer is B. So the key reason is that the invoice for an expense that has been incurred during the project period. There is a common misconception on whether a financially closed award needs to be reopened to process additional reimbursement or whether an adjustment request will be sufficient. A request to reopen and extend the award is only required when new spending is needed. 120 days after the end of the award period of performance, NSF executes a financial closeout process. This is automated and de-obligates any remaining funds from the award, meaning it sweeps the remaining balance and reduces the award budget to equal the final expenditure reported. After this 120-day closeout, NSF grantees have additional 14 months to submit an upward adjustment. This additional payment request will be paid from the remaining balance that was swept at the financial closeout. Again, the key takeaway I would like to reiterate is that the adjustment is financially closed awards are permitted when reimbursement for expenses were incurred during the project period of performance. Although adjustments are permitted, there are some limitations to be aware of. Payment transactions total submitted via ACMS must be equal to or greater than $0. This means your institution must offset the return against an available award that requires payments. If such an award is not available, the funds must be returned via one of our other remittance options. Furthermore, there are additional restrictions enforced by the system. Adjustments against an individual closed award must be greater than or equal to plus or minus $1. Upward adjustment via ACMS, also known as additional payments, are available for 14 months after the award is financially closed, or in some cases, a shorter period if the funding appropriation cancels prior to the end of the 14-month period. In most cases, this would translate to be 18 months past the end date of the award period of performance. Downward adjustment via ACMS, which is also known as returns or refunds, are available until the funding appropriation cancels. ACMS eligibility check will indicate whether the award is eligible when trying to submit an adjustment payment transaction. We've talked a lot about money going out of NSF. What about money being returned? If your organization needs to remit funds to NSF due to a positive cash on hand balance, the remittance can be completed in one of 4 ways: ACMS, pay.gov, credit gateway, or by check. As we just discussed, within ACMS, as long as your overall payment request is net positive, you can submit a credit against an award as an offset to the current payment request. We cannot accept a net negative request through NSF across one or more awards. If ACMS is no longer an option, submitting remittances to NSF electronically through pay.gov is strongly preferred. This allows remitters to make secure electronic payments and decreases the processing time associated with receiving and processing a paper check. Check is our least preferred method. We've experienced significant delays in processing manual checks, especially during the pandemic, and it's still occasionally, we experience delays even today. Further, there is an NSF and government-wide shift to reduce paper checks as much as possible. We have received some feedback from some of our grantees on constraints that prevent their organization from using pay.gov. For example, if your organization is part of a state-managed treasury that does not allow ACH debit from your central bank account. We have been collaborating with the Department of Treasury on this specific scenario and how we can accommodate this common issue with those organizations still sending checks. There are newer platforms that have been successful with accommodating customers that have similar constraints. One of these platforms we've recently deployed is called Credit Gateway, which I will discuss further on the next slide. Credit Gateway is our new electronic remittance option. Our team has recently concluded a small pilot to test the feasibility of Credit Gateway with our customers. During the pilot, our team worked with a couple of institutions who were frequent remitters by check or had indicated to us their inability to use pay.gov. The pilot allowed us to better define our own business process and for us to better understand the experience of the grant recipient processing a credit gateway request with their bank. We are now making this option available to everyone. The goal is to reduce the administrative burden and processing time for both the institution as well as the NSF staff. If your institution is currently unable to use pay.gov, it is likely because pay.gov uses ACH debit. In contrast, Credit Gateway uses ACH credit, so it is initiated by you, the institution. It cannot be done through an online portal like pay.gov, but needs to be processed directly with the institution's bank so that it is authorized and approved by the account owner. You may be asking yourself, what is the difference between ACH debit and ACH credit? An ACH debit transaction involves the receiver pulling from the sender's account. In this example, the receiving organization is the initiator of the transfer of funds. An ACH credit transaction allows the sender to push money into the different account, for example, like online bill pay. In this scenario, the sender is authorizing the transaction directly with their own bank. One final reminder, if you are using pay.gov for the first time, you may need to first contact your financial institution to whitelist NSS account to debit the remittance, which often needs special permission depending on the configuration of the account. This specific detail needed is on this slide and also on our grants frequently asked questions that we still have here. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to be moving into a topic that only impacts about 1% of our overall active portfolio in a given year. Well, what is that context? NSF typically has around 45 to 50,000 active grants at a given time. And so when I say 1%, I'm saying typically only 450 to 500 awards are impacted by canceling appropriations each year. And so you may not see this every year, and you may not have seen this in recent history, but when your organization is impacted by it, it can be a big deal. That's why I'm going to be talking about it. So what are canceling appropriations? Canceling appropriations does not mean your award is being canceled, but the underlying funding mechanism that NSF used to issue the award also has a life cycle. The beginning of that life cycle is when it's open and we are able to issue new obligations out of it. Once that open period ends, then we have a certain time frame in which we are allowed to liquidate those obligations that were made, where we can record expenses and make payments out of that appropriation. That's typically 5 years after that open period ended. After which, that appropriation basically cancels or expires. It goes back to the Treasury, and NSF does not have the ability to expense against that funding line any further. This is why a typical standard grant is only issued for a 3 to 5 year period. Most awards, if they are on schedule, will never run into an issue with canceling appropriations. But if you have an award that has experienced delays and is in multiple no-cost extension periods, you could be impacted by this. We do our best to notify you when you have an award is impacted. Your first notification will be in October of a given fiscal year, where we will add a red flag alongside the award in ACMS. You can filter off of that red flag to see which awards are impacted. We further, starting in January of each year, we send out a courtesy notification out to the institutions that have awards impacted by canceling appropriations. We will continue to send out that notice each month, and we send it to the Central Finance Office, the folks that have the ACMS permissions. These notifications are not sent directly to the principal investigator. We ask that the ACMS point of contact be that liaison with the PI to have that conversation about what the appropriate steps might be to spend those funds appropriately before the cutoff date. In some instances, a no-cost extension might be granted to the last day of availability of the funds. That means your no-cost extension could be granted up to September 30th of the year in which it is canceling. But that gets further complicated by the fact that each year, to support our own year-end closeout process, we shut down ACMS a week prior to the end of the fiscal year. And so your ability to request your final expenditure reimbursements for an award impacted by canceling funds is actually truncated. This year, our cutoff date is September 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you do receive this notice from us, it's important that you take appropriate action in a timely fashion, spending the funding appropriately and getting that final request in. It may involve estimating what your final expenses are and getting that request in before the cutoff of September 23rd. No-cost extensions will not extend the life cycle of the appropriation. So if only appropriated funds that are canceling remain on the award and you attempt to submit a no-cost extension, you'll get an error notice here. As demonstrated on this screenshot, appropriated funds have expired for this award and this notification or request cannot be submitted. I want to walk you through a hypothetical scenario that is commonly occurs. A university is managing an award that they received with funding in FY 2018. That's the appropriation that is canceling this year. Subsequent funding or a supplement was received in FY 2021. The university receives a no-cost extension for the award, extending the end date from May 31st of this year out to May 31st of 2025. Well, this spring, you received a notification from my office saying that your award is impacted by canceling funds. Well, I received a no-cost extension out to 2025. Why did I receive that notice? I can simply ignore that notice, right? The answer is false. I want to take a deeper dive into that scenario because this commonly happens. Sometimes you might receive the bulk of your funding all up front. That's what we call a standard grant. In this case, $250,000. Well, let's say right now in June, your PI has $100,000 remaining. Well, when you take that $250,000 and that supplement that was received of $25,000, that notification we send out will identify that $75,000 is at risk of canceling appropriations, whereas the supplement of $25,000 is not. So what does that mean? You have an end date that's been extended to May 31st of 2025. Does that mean your PI can spend the whole $100,000 all the way out to May 31st of 2025? No. Because come September 30th, the $75,000 that remains from that original funding source will cancel. The only amount of that $100,000 that will remain available on October 1 is that supplement of $25,000. So it's important that your PIs understand that scenario. Unfortunately, every September we get calls or emails from people who are surprised by the fact that they are losing a large portion of their funding that remains available, even though they were granted an extension of their end date. That's why we make our communications as clear as possible, and we send that out every month leading up to September. One more look at that same scenario. Most of our research appropriations are open for a 2-year period. So you can see our FY 2018 research appropriation would have been open in 2018 and in 2019. That's where we could make new awards from that funding source. We then would have 5 years to liquidate those expenses against that funding line out to September 30th of 2024. And you can see in contrast, the FY21 supplement had an open period in 2021 and 2022 and would remain available for expenses until 2027. I see someone was standing over there with a question. Would you like to ask that?
I think this graph answers it, but my question was, when an award is it made from that fiscal year appropriation and therefore available for 5 years after that? Or do you sometimes make awards of other years' remaining funds?
Yeah, so we're only allowed to use the funds for new obligations during that green 2-year period. But that doesn't mean that those funds are used in that first month. They could be used 12 months into that 24-month period. They could be used 20 months into that 24-month period. And so typically, you could say, in theory, we have 7 years to liquidate funding that we receive. But that doesn't mean that translates to 7 years for you, because we may have taken some of that 7-year period to actually make that award. And
So
then
if I have you right, you could have a 2018 fiscal year budget that you made an award deep into 2019, and so really there's only 5 years left before it's canceled.
Yes. It's pretty rare. I know our program offices strive to use the funding in the first year of availability as much as possible. But we had an instance just recently where funding was actually used in that 23rd month of availability, right down to the wire. And a 5-year a batch of 5-year awards were issued with that. That meant with the standard period of performance, not even with the no-cost extension, that took it right up to September of the year it was canceling, which was a surprise for that batch of award recipients when we sent out that first notice, because some of them were banking on receiving that no-cost extension. So there are some exceptions. In most cases, that's not going to happen. I would say that is the anomaly when that occurs. So one more scenario for the benefit of our IG, because this has happened. This is why we have it in our FAQs and in our outreach presentations now. So a university was granted a no-cost extension. There was $100,000 available on the award, with $50,000 of it canceling. The university estimates $30,000 of the canceling funds will be spent by the end of September. They would like to request that advance payment of the canceling funds prior to the ACMS shutdown. How much should their advance payment be for? 0, because advance payments are not permitted. $30,000, because advance payments should be limited to the expected expenditures. Or I'm going to be very ingenious and just request the full $50,000 so my PI can spend the rest after October 1. The answer is B. Advance payments are allowed, but they should be limited to your immediate cash needs, and they should be based on a justifiable estimation method. It should not be just, I want to bypass the appropriation law and request the full $50,000 because the payment and analytics branch has been hounding me with these monthly notices every month telling me to spend these funds. So I just requested it down so we could spend it. That's actually kind of what they claimed when there was an audit finding that we told them they could do it. So we want to make it explicitly clear, advance payments are permitted, but they should only be requested for reasonable and allocable expenditures that are expected to be incurred before the cancellation date. So some of the other courtesy notifications that we send out, I want to spend some time on. There was a question yesterday about whether NSF sends out a notification to let people know that a no-cost extension could be requested. We don't in general, but our group does send out a courtesy notification when you're approaching the end of your period of performance and you have an unusually high remaining balance left. So how do we define that? Well, we historically had been defining that as you're approaching the last 3 months of your period of performance and you had 75% of your funding left unspent according to our records. So what could that mean? That could mean that your PI has been experiencing significant delays and has not spent very much of their budget. Or it could mean they have been working on the project, but maybe they haven't been charging the right spending account on your end, which could result in cost transfers. Or it could mean spending has been occurring, the proper recording has been happening, but there's a breakdown in your central finance office and timely reimbursements and expenditure reporting has not been occurring. It could be a number of different circumstances. We don't pass judgment or make assumptions when we're sending this notification out. We're simply wanting to put it on your radar in the central finance office that there's this award with a high remaining unspent balance. We would like you to have that conversation with your PI to find out what the appropriate course of action should be to resolve it. We've been getting feedback from, you have a question?
I do. So with the no-cost extension, is it advisable during the last fiscal year of that grant for PIs to really analyze the activities and the spending and I guess I have a two-part question. One, if they take note that they're not going to expend all of their funds or most of their funds in a certain category, but possibly can use it in a different category, and as long as it's in line with the scope of the project, is that something that they can do with your permission, asking to reallocate funds from another category to another? And I do understand that it was said yesterday that you cannot remove funding from the participant category, but can you move funding from one to the participant category?
Yeah, in general, rebudget authority is delegated down to the grant recipient with few exceptions. There are certain exceptions it was mentioned yesterday on several of them. When the exception applies, prior approval is required. If the exception doesn't apply, then you're allowed to make the rebudget, but we do always suggest that you document why the rebudget is being done. If you're unclear on whether prior approval is necessary, we always suggest that you reach out to your Division of Grants and Agreements grant officer to have that conversation, because they're the ones who are going to be giving that prior approval when it's necessary.
Okay, so I guess, again, to the original question, so is it advisable to not wait until that 3 months, but to really look at it at the beginning of that last fiscal year and say, okay, how can we really use this strategically to expend funds to the better of the program or, the project?
Yeah, I mean, it's my opinion that the PI should be working with their staff to be forecasting what their needs are going to be and have an idea of what the spend plan is going to look like. But we've been receiving feedback concerning this specific notification that 3 months may not be soon enough. So we just kicked off a pilot just recently where we're looking at how we could improve the effectiveness of this notification. And we collected a lot of feedback that 6 months prior to the end date would actually be better. And we also heard that maybe 50% of the remaining balance would be better than 75%. So we took a look at the numbers. These numbers are from February. Under the current method of 3 months and 75% remaining, we were sending out notices to 111 awards. But when we applied the new parameters, as you could see, it started increasing the number of awards being picked up significantly. If we change both the parameters to 6 months and 50%, it increased the number of awards tenfold, which meant some organizations who historically would have received only a notice from us, including 3 or 4 awards, would now be receiving a notice for 30 awards. And we were concerned that that would actually lead to inaction rather than an improvement of effectiveness. Perhaps it would be too overwhelming to have that discussion on 30 awards at an institution instead of just focusing your resources on the smaller number. So because of that, we decided we would, for now, only change the time to the 6 months, but leave the percent remaining as 75%, which increased the number of awards being picked up to 500 instead of 111. I'm calling this a pilot because we're still open to feedback. We don't want this new notification version to become overwhelming for your organization. And so if the new notification is not having the intended outcome that we were looking for, we welcome that feedback and we are collecting that. There's a data point that I wanted to share here. So the other thing I wanted to share was under the old method, that 111 awards represented 89 unique institutions. The complete new method of 6 months and 50%, that 1,400 award would have involved sending notices to 403 institutions instead of 89. So it was a significant difference. And I just wanted to represent something that I was sharing just a moment ago. And I want you to think about it, because I welcome if you want to come up and talk to me this afternoon and share your thoughts on this. If you are one of these institutions in the top 10, where you would have only received a listing of 1 to 4 awards, and now you're receiving 20 to 30, how would that feel? Because in theory, we also agreed that 6 months and 50% made a lot of sense. But we were hesitant to pull the trigger on that when we actually put the numbers behind it. And in one case, I went ahead and included 16 on this slide because under the old method, they would not have received a notice, but under the new method, they would have all of a sudden received a listing of 16 awards. All right, the last courtesy notification I want to talk about is our grant awards with no payment activity for more than 12 months. We call it GNAP for short. We thought we were being a little cute because these are grants that took a nap. Accounting jokes, right? Probably one tier lower than dad jokes. So we started sending this out last summer, and we send it out quarterly. We identify any awards your institution might have that have not had any activity in our system for more than 12 months. When we started this, you'll see we identified over 1,000 awards that qualified for the notification. I want to point out a particular section of particular interest. That null category represents awards that have not had any payment activity since their inception, and they have existed for more than 12 months. You can imagine why that might be an area of concern, right? We've given you this award that you really wanted, and we're more than a year into it, and you have reported no expenditures. Okay? Some updated numbers. As of March of this year, these are the new numbers. We still have 286 awards showing up in null. We've actually, once we started looking into this, there have been 2 instances that I wanted to share as well. We started also looking at institutions with a high percentage of their award portfolio showing up on this dashboard. And we've had 2 instances where 100% of an award's institutions, or an institution's awards, were showing up on this grants with no payment activity for more than a year. One institution had over 20 awards, and another institution had 5. And what that tells us is the person who historically had been requesting payments probably left that organization, and that organization did not give the responsibility or the role to a new person to be requesting payments and reimbursements from us. And so we have reached out to those organizations to make sure that they are reporting their expenditures and requesting reimbursements as appropriate. One of the organizations was extremely grateful we reached out because the person had left kind of all of a sudden and left them in a lurch. And they didn't know who to contact. I would think that if I was in that position, I would do a little bit more due diligence in looking that up and not let it go for a year. But our courtesy notification did its trick. Jeremy, question?
Yeah, we have a question from online asking who in the organization does the unobligated funds notice go to?
Yeah, good question. All 3 of these notifications, canceling appropriations, high unliquidated balances of concern, grant awards with no payment activity, all go to the financial points of contact. The ACMS points of contact for the organization. And we ask that the central finance office be that liaison with the appropriate other people within your organization, whether that's PI, department support staff, et cetera. So I like to transition after the notifications right into this, but we got a question. Go ahead.
On requesting indirect costs, is there a standard procedure? Do you add that with, when it's approved, to each request until it's filled? Do you ask for it all at once? Do you wait till the end of the grant to ask for the indirect costs?
Yeah, so every organization should have their own policies and procedures on how they apply indirect costs. Here's some examples I've seen. I'm not, again, the way Gene put it yesterday, examples does not mean this is the only right way. Some organizations, their financial system is set up to apply indirect costs the moment direct cost expenses hit their financial system. Others may wait for the month to close, and they will evaluate then the direct costs that have hit the account and apply indirect costs for the entire month. It really just depends on how your own organization's financial system is set up. We ask that you seek reimbursement or expense, report it as an expenditure once you've recognized it according to your own accounting practices at your organization.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so a lot of these examples I have in here are based on real life examples that we've experienced. So Bob, he's been wonderful at your organization. He's been responsible for reporting NSF expenditures and seeking reimbursement for a long time. He's now retiring. You are backfilling him. You haven't been given your own ACMS permissions though. But good old Bob, he's saving your day. He's left you his user ID and password on a Post-it note so that you can continue requesting the funding. Is this a problem? Okay, you should not be using Bob's NSF user ID and password. Not only is it a security risk, but as I just got done explaining, these courtesy notifications go to who? They're going to continue going to Bob, not you. In all likelihood, his email account was deactivated shortly after he retired, so it's actually going to nobody. So just a friendly reminder, this has been said a couple times already, but each user is required to have a unique ID. You should not be sharing your ID or password, and there should only be one account per user. When we shifted to the new user ID platform on research.gov, we did find some organizations were using group user accounts and passwords. And so we like to make that explicitly clear that group user accounts are not appropriate. We should have individual names in those email addresses for your organization, not like an OSP fin or OSP fin at university.com, right? It shouldn't be some generic email address. So I mentioned earlier, we do not collect the FFR anymore, but program income used to be collected on the FFR. ACMS does not collect program income with the ACMS payment transactions, so we still have a responsibility to collect that. We decided to collect that on an annual basis instead of quarterly. If your institution had an active award during our fiscal year, you will be required to provide us a response, regardless of whether you were earning program income or not. So you might be asking yourself, what is program income? Well, if your award, the funded activity that your award is performing generates an external source of income, that's program income. The reimbursement your organization is receiving for the federal spending that you're doing is not program income. Sometimes we receive program income reports that are simply regurgitating what they've already reported in ACMS. We don't like to see that. The large majority of our award recipients do not have awards that generate program income. So over 80% of the responses we receive each year are negative reports, indicating they had no program earned or to report. But we recognize this is also still a problem area where there are institutions that are earning program income and not properly reporting it. In particular, IUCRC with membership just to give you a real life example of why it's important, even in the post-award office to understand funding announcements. The IUCRC funding announcement requires that membership fees from industry partners that are participating in that award, those membership fees need to be treated and utilized as program income, which is a deviation from the standard PAPG. But that's made known in the funding announcement. So even in the post-award office, it is important at times to also be familiar with the special terms that might have been outlined in that funding announcement. So here's some examples of what program income is. Registration fees for participants participating in a conference is a very common example. Our standard treatment is additive. That means you can add the program income earned to the existing federal budget. Sometimes special treatment might be applied. In particular, the most common way that it's added is through FL26, the group travel award grant conditions, or for conferences. When that's added, the standard treatment language of the PAPG is replaced by a deductive treatment paragraph from the FL26. So it's important to understand what type of treatment applies to your award. We do have a webinar each October that goes into more detail on that topic. So if you are responsible for submitting the program income report at your organization and want more information on it, please plan on attending that webinar. We do have a recording of last year's webinar on our website even today. All right, I have about 6 minutes left. I'm going to go through a couple of these a little bit faster. So we do some improper payment testing. We ask that if you get picked up in the sample, that you participate and respond to those requests. It might feel like an audit. We are actually not conducting an audit on your organization. This is for the benefit of our own financial statement. We have a responsibility for assessing our risk for making improper payments. But when you submit your ACMS payment request, do you submit supporting documentation with every single request? The answer is no. So in order for us to evaluate whether a payment was proper and we wanted to actually test the appropriateness of an actual transaction, who do we need to come to ask for that supporting documentation? It's you, because you're the custodians of it. We do a very small portfolio sample when considering the number of actual transactions we pay each year. And so you may not get picked up every year, but if you do get picked up, we ask that you do respond and participate in it. I want to share this because I always like to get you thinking. Many of you probably work in the central office, and you might get expense reimbursement approval requests for items that the PI is trying to spend money on. Here's some examples. I want you to read through them here and think about it to yourself. Which of these, if they came across your desk, would you approve? In general, they seem pretty straightforward, right? Or do they maybe warrant some additional questions that you might need to ask to get some more context? Let's say you did your due diligence and you asked for more context, and this is what you received. Would your approval decision change with this extra context? These came from a real audit finding recently that our friends in Rochelle Ray's group had to actually do an audit resolution on. it's important as you're requested to do these approval decisions that if you notice red flags or you feel like more information is warranted or needed, you're asking those questions. You're doing those due diligence. You're doing that due diligence. If it seems funny to you, it's probably going to seem funny to somebody else. And I like to add that C in particular because a lot of times people will say, well, it was part of the budget. End of story. It was part of the approved budget. But in that particular case, they didn't actually order them and receive them until the grant had already ended. If you had to sit in an audit and justify and defend that, how could you answer the question how those units were actually used to benefit the project if they weren't received until the end of the project period, until after the end of the project period? So, just some real life examples that I like to get you thinking about. Here's another, I always chuckle on this one. So you in the central office may not be the actual holder of the documents. So you get the request from us and you have to go ping somebody else to get the documents. But you're busy. And they finally provide you what you've been asking for, but it's a 122-page PDF. You don't have the time to look through it yourself, so you just send it on to us. It's got to have the right stuff in there, right? Well, please curate that. Out of that 122 pages, there was so much noise in that document, we couldn't make heads or tails on whether it was actually allowable. In the end, we probably only needed 7 to 10 pages out of that 122-page document to actually validate the expense. Worse yet, it had a lot of internal communication and correspondence, some of which you may not have actually wanted to share with us. So take the time to look at what your department staff is providing you and make sure you're curating it. I personally like to refer to this as a kitchen sink of support documentation. You gave us everything and the kitchen sink. So trim it down and it will make the review and approval process that we're conducting much simpler and easier. So, any remaining questions?
Okay, so in the pie chart you showed earlier, the supplement had a different performance period.
Not a different performance period, but an underlying, so the appropriation that we use to fund these awards have a life cycle. And that supplement was out of a different appropriation life cycle. I use different terminology on purpose because performance period can be construed as being equal to the award performance period, and I don't want that to be misconstrued.
Okay, thank you for that clarification because I wanted to know if when a supplement is awarded, if it can have a different performance period than the original proposal.
No, usually a supplement is added to the existing award. And in that case, that scenario, the end date did get extended past the cancellation date of some of the funding. But it was the overall award that had the end date extended. It's just, it did not change the underlying appropriation life cycle and whether those funds were available or not.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Yep.
Hi, when you deobligate and the grant is still in life during the project period, why aren't you sending a modification? I think that would help because I know our central office, I know we had deobligations back in September and I wanted to align my budget and they're a little iffy on the deobligations. I thought if you guys send a modification, then the PI themselves know what their budget is.
So there's a couple different, we're at the end of our time, so this is going to be our final question. There's a couple different scenarios where deobligations occur. Now, if we're entering the end of the award and we're doing a financial closeout, we're doing a soft deobligation. We're taking the obligation and matching your final expenditures, but we don't permanently take that money away. So if you come in after the fact and need it to adjust it, you can still adjust that final reported expenditure amount. That's why it's kind of a softy obligation. That softy obligation will not generate an amendment. If it's a de-obligation, like an actual hard de-obligation that DGA is processing, an amendment in general will be generated, but there's an exception that I'm aware of, and that involves PI transfers. When a PI transfer is processed, it's my understanding that the receiving organization receives that new award, but I don't believe an amendment is necessarily always generated. Is that, anybody want to confirm that?
My PI didn't leave, and I did not get it.
All right, so if you had a specific scenario, I suggest we can take that specific discussion offline, and I would recommend you contact your grant officer to see why that amendment letter didn't get generated. All right, excellent.